Titanic's maiden voyage was intended to be the first of many transit. What's up guys, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. It's Tesh. I hope you guys are doing well. Today's video is going to be about the RMS Titanic. This year is the 110th anniversary of the sinking of the RMS Titanic. I honestly love the story and I love the history of it. I did not just watch the movie like most people assume when you say you love the Titanic. I've watched extensive documentaries and I've researched it quite a bit, more than I'd like to admit, but I have. What fascinates me a lot, and what fascinates a lot of people that love the Titanic, is the idea that the sinking could have been avoided. For me, it's the stories of the people that were aboard the ship and the people that have passed on. For me, it's the idea of the futures they would have brought, the ideas of the children that were on there and what they would have brought to our future, what they would have created, what they would have done to make our history and our modern day era different from the one that we have today, because as you know, it takes one thing to change history. So yeah, today I would like to dive into this magnificent ship, the history, the voyage, and the story. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Please don't forget to drop a like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Titanic, in full, Royal Mail ship Titanic, or the RMS Titanic, was a British luxury liner that sank on April 15th in the year 1912 during its maiden voyage en route to New York City from Southampton, England. Killing about 1,500 passengers and crew, it is one of the most famous tragedies in modern history. In the early 1900s, the transatlantic passenger trade was highly profitable and competitive, with ship lines vying to transport wealthy travelers and immigrants across the world. Two of the chief liners were White Star and Cunard. By the summer of 1907, Cunard seemed poised to increase its share of the market with the debut of two new ships, the Lusitania and the Mauretania, which were scheduled to enter service later that year. The two passenger liners were garnering much attention for their expected speed. Both would later set speed records crossing the Atlantic Ocean. Looking to answer his rival, White Star chairman J. Bruce Ismay reportedly met with William Peary, who controlled the Belfast shipbuilding firm Holland and Wolff, which constructed most of White Star's vessels. The two men devised a plan to build a class of large liners that would be known for their comfort instead of their speed. It was eventually decided that the three vessels would be constructed: the Olympic, the Titanic, and the Britannic. The construction of Olympic and Titanic took place virtually in parallel, with Olympic's keel laid down first on the 16th of December 1908 and Titanic's on the 31st of March 1909. Both ships took about 26 months to build and followed much of the same construction process. They were designed essentially as an enormous floating box girder, with the keel acting as a backbone and the frames of the hull forming the ribs. At the base of the ships, a double bottom, 5 feet 3 inches deep, supported 300 frames, each between 24 inches and 36 inches apart and measuring up to 66 feet long. They terminated at B deck and were covered with steel plates which formed the outer skin of the ships. As to safety elements, the Titanic had 16 compartments that included doors which could be closed from the bridge so that water could be contained in the event the hull was breached. Although they were presumed to be watertight, the bulkheads were not capped at the top, and the shipbuilders claimed that the 4 compartments could be flooded without endangering the liner's buoyancy. The system led many to claim that the Titanic was unsinkable. These ships were largely designed by Thomas Andrews of Holland and Wolff. In addition to ornate decorations, the Titanic featured an immense first-class dining saloon, 4 elevators, and a swimming pool. Its second-class accommodations were comparable to first-class features on other ships, and its third-class offerings, although modest, were still noted for their comfort. Following completion of the hull and the main superstructure, the Titanic was launched on May 31st, 1911. It then began the fitting out phase as machinery was loaded into the ship and interior work began. After the Olympic's maiden voyage in June 1911, slight changes were made to the Titanic's design, and in early April 1912, the Titanic underwent its sea trials, after which the ship was declared seaworthy. One last thing before I move on to talking about the maiden voyage and the sinking. The name Titanic is derived from the Titans of Greek mythology, meaning she was strong, an enormous force of power, and massive. Titanic's maiden voyage was intended to be the first of many transatlantic crossings between Southampton and New York via Cherbourg, France and Queenstown, Ireland, on westbound runs returning via Plymouth in England on the eastbound front. Indeed, her entire schedule of voyages through to December 1912 still exists. When the route was established, 4 ships were assigned to service in addition to the Titanic and the Majestic. The RMS Oceanic and the brand new RMS Adriatic sailed the route. When the Olympic entered service in June 1911, she replaced the Titanic, which after completing her last run on the service in late April was transferred to the Dominion Line Canadian service. The following August, Adriatic was transferred to White Star Line's main Liverpool-New York service, and in November, Majestic was withdrawn from service, impeding the arrival of the RMS Titanic in the coming months, and was mothballed as a reserve ship. As it prepared to embark on its maiden voyage, the Titanic was one of the largest and most opulent ships in the world. It had a gross registered tonnage of 46,328 tons, and when fully laden, the ship displaced more than 52,000 tons of weight. The Titanic was approximately 882.5 feet long and about 92.5 feet wide at its widest point. On the 10th of April 1912, the Titanic set sail on its maiden voyage, traveling from Southampton, England to New York City. Nicknamed the Millionaire Special, the ship was fittingly captained by Edward J. Smith, who was known as the Millionaire's Captain because of his popularity among wealthy passengers. Indeed, on board were a number of prominent people, including American businessman Benjamin Guggenheim, British journalist William Thomas Stead, and Macy's department store co-owner Isidore Straus and wife Ida. In addition, Ismay and Andrews were also traveling on the Titanic, and surprisingly, the voyage of Titanic nearly began with a collision. However, when the suction from Titanic caused a docked New York to swing into the giant liner's part, after an hour of maneuverings to prevent an accident, the Titanic was underway. On the evening of April 10th, the ship stopped at Cherbourg, France. The city's dock was too small to accommodate the Titanic, so passengers had to be ferried to and from the ship in tenders. Among those passengers who were boarding the Titanic were John Jacob Astor, his second wife Madeleine, and Mrs. Molly Brown. After some 2 hours of being docked, the Titanic resumed its journey, and the next morning of April 11th, the liner made its last scheduled stop in Europe at Queenstown, Ireland. At approximately 1:30 p.m., the ship set sail for New York City, and on board were some 2,200 people, approximately 1,300 of whom were passengers. The weather was clear as she left Ireland under cloudy skies with a headwind. Temperatures remained fairly mild on Saturday, April 13th, but the following day, Titanic crossed a cold weather front with strong winds and waves up to 8 feet. These died down as the day progressed until by the evening of Sunday 14th April it became clear, calm and very cold. The first 3 days of the voyage from Queenstown had passed without apparent incident. A fire had begun in one of Titanic's coal bunkers approximately 10 days prior to her departure, and that fire continued to burn for several days into her voyage. Passengers were unaware of the situation because these fires occurred frequently on board steamships at the time. They occurred due to spontaneous combustion of coal. The fires had to be extinguished with fire hoses and by moving the coal on top to another bunker and by removing the burning coal and feeding it into a furnace. The fire was finally extinguished on April 14, 1912. From the 11th of April to local apparent noon the next day, Titanic covered 484 knots. The following day she covered 519 knots, and by noon on the final day of her voyage she covered 546 knots. From then up until the time of her sinking, she traveled another 258 knots, averaging 21 knots. Titanic had received a number of warnings from other ships of drifting ice in the area of the Grand Banks of Newfoundland, but a Captain Edward Smith chose to ignore them, and one of the ships to warn Titanic was the Atlantic Line's Mesaba. Nevertheless, the ship continued to steam at full speed ahead, which was standard practice at the time. Although the ship was not trying to set a speed record, timekeeping was a priority, and under prevailing maritime practices, ships were often operated at close to full speed with ice warnings seen as advisories, and reliance were placed upon lookouts and the watch on the bridge of the ship. It was generally believed that ice posed little to no danger to large vessels. Close calls with ice were not uncommon, and even head-on collisions had not been disastrous. In 1907, SS Crown Prince Wilhelm, a German liner, had rammed an iceberg but still had been able to complete her voyage, and Captain Smith himself had declared in 1907 that he could not imagine any condition which would cause a ship to founder. Modern shipbuilding has gone beyond that. Two lookouts, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee. They were stationed in the crow's nest of the Titanic. Their task was made difficult by the fact that the ocean was unusually calm that night because there would be little water breaking at the base of the ship. An iceberg would be even more difficult to spot in these conditions, and in addition, the crow's nest binoculars were missing. At approximately 11:40, about 400 knots south of Newfoundland, Canada, an iceberg was sighted, and the bridge was notified.
Is there anyone there?
Yes, what do you see?
Iceberg, right ahead!
Thank you.
First Officer William Murdoch ordered both the ship a hard starboard, a maneuver that under the order system then would place the ship to turn port and the engines reversed. The Titanic began to turn, but it was too close to avoid the collision. The ship's starboard side scraped along the iceberg. At least 5 of its watertight compartments towards the bow were ruptured, and after assessing the damage, Andrews determined that as the ship's forward compartments filled with water, its bow would drop deeper and deeper into the ocean, causing water from the ruptured compartments to spill over into each succeeding compartment, thereby sealing the ship's fate. It became clear that the ship was doomed, as she could not survive more than 4 compartments being flooded. Titanic began sinking bow first, with water spilling from compartment to compartment as her angle in the water became steeper and steeper. The Titanic began to founder. Captain Smith had ordered to begin sending distress signals, one of which reached the Carpathia at approximately 12:20 a.m. on April 15th, and the Cunard ship immediately headed toward the stricken liner. However, the Carpathia was some 58 knots away when it received the signal, and it would take more than 3 hours for the Carpathia to reach the Titanic. Other ships also responded, including the Titanic's sister, the Olympic, but all were too far away. A vessel was spotted nearby the Titanic, but the Titanic was unable to contact it, and the Californian was also in the vicinity, but its wireless had been turned off for the night. As attempts were made to contact nearby vessels, the lifeboats began to be launched, with orders women and children first. Although the Titanic's number of lifeboats exceeded that required by the British Board of Trade, its 20 boats could carry only 1,178 people, far short of the total number of passengers. Those aboard the Titanic were also ill-prepared for such an emergency, and in accordance with the accepted practices of the time, as ships were seen as largely unsinkable and lifeboats were intended to transfer passengers to nearby vessels, Titanic only had enough lifeboats to carry about half of those on board. If Titanic had carried a full complement that night of about 3,339 passengers and crew, only about a third of them would have been able to be accommodated in the lifeboats. The crew had not been adequately trained in carrying out an evacuation like this. This problem was exacerbated by lifeboats being launched well below capacity because crewmen worried that the davits would not be able to support the weight of a fully loaded boat. Lifeboat number 7, which was the first to leave Titanic, held only 27 people, though it had space for 65. In the end, only 705 people would be rescued in lifeboats. Third-class passengers were largely left to fend for themselves, causing many of them to become trapped below decks as the ship filled with water. The women and children first protocol was generally followed when loading the lifeboats, and most male passengers and crew were left aboard the ship. By 1 o'clock in the morning, water was seen at the base of E deck of the grand staircase. Amid the growing panic, several male passengers tried to board lifeboat number 14, causing 5th Officer Harold Lowe to fire his gun 3 times. Around this time, distress calls reflected a growing desperation as one noted that the ship cannot last much longer. As the Titanic's bow continued to sink, the stern began to rise out of the water and the sea poured in through the open hatches and grates. And at about 2 a.m. the stern's propellers were clearly visible above the water, and the only lifeboats that remained on the ship were 3 collapsible lifeboats, and Captain Smith had released the crew saying, "It's every man for himself." He was reportedly last seen on the bridge and his body was never found, and at approximately 2:18 a.m. the lights on the Titanic went out. It then broke in two and the bow went underwater first. Reports later speculate that the bow took some 6 minutes to sink to the bottom of the ocean, traveling at 30 kilometers an hour or 30 miles an hour. The stern momentarily settled back in the water before rising again, eventually becoming vertical. It then briefly remained in that position before plunging to its end. At 2:20 a.m., Titanic foundered as her stern disappeared beneath the Atlantic. All remaining passengers and crew were immersed into the lethally cold water with a temperature of -2 degrees Celsius. Sudden immersion into the freezing water typically causes death within minutes, either from cardiac arrest, uncontrollable breathing of water, or cold incapacitation. Almost all of those in the water died of cardiac arrest or other bodily reactions to the freezing water within 15 to 30 minutes. Only 5 of them were helped into the lifeboats, though the lifeboats had room for almost 500 more people. Distress signals were sent by wireless, rockets, and lamp, but none of the ships that responded were near enough to reach Titanic before she sank. A radio operator on board the SS Burma, for instance, estimated that it would be 6 a.m. before the liner could arrive at the scene. Meanwhile, the SS Californian, which was the last to have been in contact before the collision, saw Titanic's flares but failed to assist. The Carpathia arrived in the area at approximately 3:30 a.m., more than an hour after the Titanic sank. Lifeboat number 2 was the first to reach the liner. Over the next several hours, the Carpathia picked up all the survivors of the Titanic. White Star Chairman Ismay wrote a message to be sent to White Star Line's officers. "Deeply regret. Advise you, Titanic sank this morning, 15th, after collision, iceberg, resulting serious loss of life. Further particulars later." At approximately 8:30 a.m., the Californian arrived, having heard the news some 3 hours earlier. Shortly before 9 a.m., the Carpathia headed for New York, where it arrived to massive crowds on April 18th. Although the majority of who were dead were crew members and third-class passengers, many of the era's wealthiest and most prominent families lost members. Among them Isidore and Ida Strauss and John Jacob Astor. In popular mind, the glamour associated with the ship and its maiden voyage and its notable passengers list magnified the tragedy of the sinking. Legends arose almost immediately about the night's events, those who had died and those who survived. Heroes and heroines such as American Molly Brown, who helped command a lifeboat, and Captain Arthur Henry Rostron, of the Carpathia were identified and celebrated by the press. Others, notably Ismay, who had found space in lifeboat and survived, were vilified. There was a strong desire to explain the tragedy, and inquiries into the sinking were held in the United States of America and the United Kingdom of Great Britain. Just one quick thing before you guys click away. Thank you guys for watching, and thank you for watching till the end. I greatly appreciate it. I just want to let you guys know that I've created a Discord server for the community around the Prince of the Ocean YouTube channel, and I would like to have you guys join it, and I would love to have you guys meet you guys and chat to you guys a bit more. Maybe we could talk about different video ideas, different topics of conversation, and become friends and grow the community around the Prince of the Ocean YouTube channel. Thank you guys for watching. I greatly appreciate it as well, because this video is one of my favorite videos and I really love this topic, especially Titanic or anything surrounding Titanic. I've spent a lot of time researching it, and I've spent a lot of time watching movies and watching documentaries, you name it, about this. So I greatly appreciate that you watched till the end. So please don't forget to drop a like, comment and subscribe if you haven't. Also share the video with people that you love and people that you would think would enjoy the video. So yes, I shall see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.